Hello, good afternoon to you. I want to take the temperature on what you think about the sentencing of 5 Just Stop Oil protesters, activists, yesterday for variously 5 years and 4 years imprisonment. The judge's sentencing remarks given before before the actual sentences were given are very severe indeed. His remarks. He outlines the impact that the protests had and the plot to create the protests in the first place. But one particular paragraph in his sentencing remarks really stood out to me because it really encapsulates clearly what the judge thought about these events and about the crimes that they were found guilty of committing. All in protest, but still. And anyway, let me read it to you, this paragraph. The judge says, "Your fanaticism makes you entirely heedless of the rights of your fellow citizens. You've taken it upon yourselves to decide that your fellow citizens must suffer disruption and harm, and how much disruption and harm they must suffer, simply so that you may parade your views." Is how he put it. And earlier on in his sentencing remarks, or in the sentencing process, he outlines some of the impact of this plot. He says, "I've sentenced all of 5 of you for the offence of conspiracy intentionally to cause a public nuisance, of which you were each convicted by the jury." And I'll talk to our guest from Just Stop Oil in just a moment, Gill Tavner, but I just want to outline a bit more of this detail. And then we can hear what those who say this is a very severe, overly severe sentence, why they think that. But let me just outline what the judge said. This conspiracy involved a sophisticated plan. This is the judge's remarks, not mine. A sophisticated plan to disrupt traffic on the M25 motorway by means of protesters climbing up gantries over the motorway. And the conspiracy bore fruit. There was disruption on the M25 on 4 successive days. You'll probably remember it, we reported on it extensively at the time. Over 45 protesters climbed or attempted to climb up gantries at various points on the motorway. Every sector of this orbital motorway was affected. This protest action was under the auspices of an organisation called Just Stop Oil, of which you are all committed activists. And he goes on to say these protests caused massive disruption. The police and the National Highways Limited, the public body which owns and is responsible for the motorway network, had no choice but to close large sections of it. At the trial, the jury heard evidence of the impact on ordinary members of the public, and he outlined some of them. People who missed flights, people who missed funerals, school students delayed for their mock exams, a pupil with special needs on his way to school who missed part of the school day and his medication, which placed the taxi driver driving him there at risk as the child could become volatile without that medication. Other school students with special educational needs were delayed on their way to school. Somebody suffering an aggressive form of cancer who missed an appointment at a cancer clinic and had to wait 2 months for a further appointment. People who were late to work, who had to work extra hours without pay to make up the time. A driver unable to deliver £5,000 worth of food to a hospital. And he says, perhaps ironically, given the causes you espouse, an individual invited to answer questions at the House of Lords before the all-party parliamentary group for water was unable to attend the meeting and incurred wasted expenses. Although thankfully no major accident occurred, a police motorcyclist who was on duty dealing with the disruption was knocked off his bike. His injuries were not the most serious, although he did have to take time off work. The bike was written off at the cost of £13,000, and he estimates overall that the policing of all of this cost £1.1 million. So that gives you some sense of the summary. It was much longer than what I've just read out there, but that gives you some sense of the summary. And I mentioned just before the news at 3 that some well-known people, activists, nature and climate activists themselves, Chris Packham, case in point, is calling for a meeting with the Attorney General for England and Wales, joining plenty of other prominent voices condemning these long jail terms for Just Stop Oil protesters. Gill Tavner, spokesperson for Just Stop Oil, good afternoon to you. Thank you for joining me.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here.
Could you outline for me why you think they are too severe? I've just given a sense of...
I think we have to start by looking at the context in which the notorious Zoom call and then the gantry actions took place. And the Zoom call was November 2022. And if we cast our minds back to the summer of 2022, it was the hottest summer on record in the UK. And when we say we broke through records, it wasn't by those small margins that records are often broken, like a fraction of a degree. It was 3, 4, 5 and 6 degrees we were smashing through those records. The fire brigade said it was the most difficult sort of period of time they've ever had to deal with. Gardens and railway lines were spontaneously combusting. There were over 1,600 heat-related deaths that summer. Now, you've got to think that the climate scientists, and the same was true over Europe. We saw pictures of the rivers dried up. We saw people flying into infernos for their holidays, in Greece, in France. So there was a lot that was very bad. And the climate scientists were saying, this is what we now face if we continue to burn fossil fuels. These extremes of whatever type of extreme will get worse around the world. So you'd think that any responsible functioning state or government would act on that, would say, this is bad, this is a sign, this is our warning sign. We take the warning and we're going to act and we're going to do all we can to reduce future harm and look after our citizens. But no, what did our government do? In October, just a few months later, it issued a new round of oil and gas licenses. Instead of protecting us, locking in further chaos and destruction into perpetuity. For whose benefit was that? Was it for ours? Was it for the people who were stuck on the M25? Or was it to perpetuate the wealth and power of, the people who pull the strings at that point? So when we look at that context and you say in October, OK, the government said, we're not going to do the sensible thing. We're not going to be responsible. So November, some people good, ordinary people thinking, what on earth can we do about this? Had a Zoom meeting and decided we've got to be heard. And yes, we're going to have to do something that will cause disruption, but we're not going to be heard otherwise. So I think within that context, that really has to be considered that way. We can't ignore that bigger destruction that we're trying to avoid.
I know what you're alluding to when you talk about the Zoom call. I didn't mention it when I read that out, but for people who might not know
sorry.
No, please don't worry. You were right to bring it into the conversation. The judge alluded to that as essentially the plot, the beginnings of the plot, the conspiracy, as it was called.
You want to call it a plot or conspiracy, but
they did,
concerned people's conversation.
Yes, the conversation that you had by Zoom, I listed just some of the impacts it had, and my goodness, you're right to outline the global impacts that we are seeing already, and we certainly did see in the summer of 2022. As you say, we had fields in Berkshire and Buckinghamshire, just as you say, just spontaneously combusting with the heat. That may be true. That is true, but does it make it right to protest in this way with other harmful impacts? Maybe not the same, maybe not globally felt, but other harmful impacts.
Those of us in Just Stop Oil always agonise of what's right, what's going to work. And, ultimately, in many ways, we don't know. We don't want to cause this destruction, but then you look at the destruction that you're trying to prevent, you take a calculation, right or wrong. That's what you do. And, the court did accept some facts as facts. It accepted that this climate crisis is an existential threat. That means that, it could make our only home uninhabitable. And it accepted that we have already gone through the 1.5 degree heating that was considered, our safe limit. We've gone through that. It accepted that. And yet the judge said that climate breakdown was a matter of opinion and belief. And he did not allow the expert testimony from a globally renowned international climate scientist. And why didn't he allow him to speak? He said on the basis that he had said things about climate action on Twitter and therefore was an activist. Now, if you think about the precedent set there, does that mean we can't bring concerned climate scientists into the court again in order to talk about the science? And so what about when we do want to bring the fossil fuel execs in and say, look at the damage you're causing? Can we not bring in the science? It's a really frightening precedent.
But let me. I suspect we'll get calls of this nature. So let me put this to you. Let me put this to you. We agree with your concerns. We feel the fear that you fear, but we also think that child with special needs should have got his or her drugs. We also think that person needed to do their job that day. That sick person needed to go to hospital and get their cancer treatment. There has to be a better way to make us and others listen to your concerns. Most people share your concerns to one degree or another. Why this way?
What is it? If we knew what it was? We don't go out here lightly. We don't want to cause any harm, any despair. But when will programmes like this get the people in and say, what's happened to your child in the light of your home being burnt? What's happened to your crops as a farmer as a result of climate change? How many people are going to be inconvenienced by food shortages? We
do report on those things. I promise you we do.
We have to get a balance, and we have to get perspective. And of course it's awful that these things happen. Of course it is. We are Just Oil are the last people who won.
But your organisation made them happen
because we're trying to stop
made them happen.
Greater harm.
They didn't just happen that day. They happened because of the plans made on the Zoom call.
Absolutely, yeah. But we are trying to stop a greater harm. What's interesting is the judge said he didn't really allow them a defence. He didn't allow them to use climate change because I'm not a legal expert, so I might be wrong. But from what I understand, he relied on a case 18 years old that said the reasonableness of a defendant's actions must be judged within this sort of assumed context of a functioning state. So, on the basis that you've got a functioning state that's looking after everybody, you therefore, what we did was unreasonable, okay? But I would argue that at that point, it's better now, marginally better. We didn't have a functioning state. We had a state that was saying, yes, these temperatures are dangerous. Yes, people are suffering. Let's get the people on the radio now who suffered that summer and say, what do you think of that? And that reading you gave from the court case earlier, I was thinking, imagine reading that out, and not in the context of, okay, the disruption caused by the Just Stop Oil activists, but instead in the context of the disruption caused by the continued burning of fossil fuel, which was supported by that government.
You have subsequently outlined that. So, space and time has been given to that. The conclusion that the judge obviously draws, and I can see the calls coming in now with people's views as to whether they agree with him or not. He says what he thinks your, as in the organisation's, perspective is. Let me read this short paragraph and you tell me whether this is your perspective.
Yeah, okay.
He says, your perspective is basically that the criminal law really doesn't matter because of climate change, and because you think the harm caused by breaking law is justified by reference to your goals. There is a real risk of each of you committing further serious offences in pursuit of your objectives, unless you are deterred from doing so by exemplary sentences in this case. So he is saying, I am making a harsh example of the five of you because your organisation thinks that what you care about matters more than the law. Is that your perspective?
Yeah, we agree that the sentencing is a deliberate deterrent, and it's not punishing what people did, just like several other court cases haven't. It's punishing.
He insisted
it's punishing the challenge to the status quo, to the power of the fossil fuel industry, and a lot of the laws that are being used against us. I don't know whether this one was. Were lobbied for by Policy Exchange, which is funded largely by oil companies. It's just not a fair place. But you're right to be troubled by the disruption. We too are extremely troubled by it, but we don't know. What was it? Chris Packham had 100,000 people, up to 100,000 marching the other day. It didn't get this interview. It didn't. And actually, if you think about it, what they were demanding.
Well, my producer working with
disruption.
Can I just say, my producer working with me today was actually reporting on that march on the day.
Yes. Not everybody was guilty, but you must admit it didn't get the coverage that this stuff gets. You have to admit that BBC didn't show it, and they didn't the year before for the big one either. Nothing, And so many people came from there thinking, actually, I get it. And, if you enjoy your paid summer leave, if you enjoy your maternity pay, if you enjoy your right to vote, and that's not just women, that's men, unless you were rich and you could vote anyway, people caused disruption and protested in order to win us those rights. Right now, we're being asked, I think the courage is in facing reality. Reality at the moment of the climate crisis is awful. And if we're cowardly, and we don't face it and we go, let's just make it go away and carry on as usual, it'll still be there and it'll still happen.
But is your perspective, can I ask you though to answer that particular question?
It's not a perspective, it's a fact.
No, I'm talking about a different perspective. The thing the judge said about perspective. Is it as he says, is your perspective that because of the seriousness of your concerns, the law doesn't matter, even if it disrupts people?
I think young people up and down the country are asking themselves, just who is the law protecting at the moment? Just whose interests is the law protecting? Was it Dickens who said the law is an ass? And Matilda said sometimes you've got to be a little bit naughty. That's probably too flippant. But,
It is for what happened on the day, yeah. But
yes, it is. I realise that, and I regret saying it already, and that's why I'm like this. But you're unrehearsed. But I think, of course, we don't want to cause any trouble to anybody, and yes, of course, we do our best. We have a blue light policy when we do our disruption. We let ambulances through, we let fire engines through. We think about it very carefully. But yeah, it is awful, and it is more awful that so many people are suffering in the world now and in the UK now from the continued burning of fossil fuels, which is just going to get worse unless we take action. And that's why Just Stop Oil is demanding an international treaty on fossil fuels to stop burning and extracting by 2030.
Okay.
It's difficult, but it's absolutely necessary. That's what we need to do.
Thank you very much for joining me and talking about this today. Gill Tavner, a spokesperson for Just Stop Oil. Your calls coming in thick and fast, so we'll get to those in a second. Let me get straight to your calls. Loads of you want to take part in this conversation, which is always wonderful. Dan says, I agree with the sentencing. I protest myself, but these are going too far. The judge was obviously stuck on the M25 and feels unforgiving. Additionally, he cares little about the environment. The list you read from the judge regarding the people impacted, none of their situations warrant multi-year jail terms. Missed appointments, even for health, missed flights, inconvenience is 4 to 5 years in jail. Proportionate. I feel it's unreasonable to anyone reasonable, says Hannah in Essex. Marilyn has called from Chadwell Heath. Hello, Marilyn.
Oh, hello, Sheila. Right, what I wanted to say was I was so pleased when I heard about the sentencing because I think it's fair. I mean, obviously, it will be half that if obviously with good behaviour or whatever. And there had to be some deterrent, as you said just now. The lady you spoke to, she said, we did have a blue light policy. We did let ambulances through and fire brigade. Well, that was marvellous of them, wasn't it, really? And what it was, I didn't experience any hold up on the motorway, but I experienced the upset of listening to people on the radio who lost jobs, who lost appointments, as you say. You've been through it all what they did, and I was so upset. And to me, you might think this is far-fetched, but to me it seemed as if it was some form of terrorism, because it was alerting terror to people that they was holding people up, in their cars, all the traffic, all the, children in the cars, people unwell. I think that it's well done for the judge, very well spoken about it all, and it had to be this sentence because too short would be not. It's got to send a message out to people that if they want to. Also, another suggestion, this is my suggestion to this Don't Stop Oil, and it's a very good one, actually. First of all, it's a peaceful one. They'd all be dressed in the same colour or whatever and just peaceful. But they could do a record like, Feed the World, that song. They bring a nice record with a nice choir and lovely sentiment words. I think that would be a very good thing they could do, rather than holding people up and, they've all got, as you say, the mobile phones, the computers, all things that actually cause a lot of environment issues anyway, in my opinion.
I think they have to bring people with them is the thing. Because if you're going to really pay proper attention to climate science, and we should, and to the impact that's happening around the world already, you have to bring people with you, don't you? And, I don't know whether a record would work, a single or something, but you have to bring people with you.
I think it would. I think it would. Definitely a lovely. I'll write the lyrics for them if they want. But I think that would be a marvellous thing. A lot of people, are for climate change. We all do our bit. Even our government, we all do what we can. And what with all the electric cars now instead of all the petrol and diesel whatever vehicles, we're all trying. Everyone is for the climate change. Everyone, so they don't have to hold everyone up.
Do you accept the seriousness of the climate situation?
Yes, I do. I understand that. I do understand that. But say it's all over the world. But everyone is trying.
But do you think the judge is right to say, even if it is as bad or worse? I'm paraphrasing what he said now here, but essentially he said, even if it's as bad or worse than you say,
Yeah.
it doesn't justify your behaviour on the day, and it doesn't justify this conspiracy. You go along with that.
Yes, it doesn't. Yes, the judge is right. What they've done is they have stepped in over the law, over the government, over everyone. They think that they rule, and they don't, and they can't now. They really, this message is, wow, I was so thrilled. I thought, years ago, a few years when I kept hearing it on the radio, your reporter saying, oh, they've just arrived, and oh, another day they've just... I thought, how ridiculous did we look to the world that we were being held up with, I couldn't understand why the police didn't even know where they were going to be. Because to me, as I say, it's a form of, a mild form, let's say, of terrorism.
Okay. Well, it's not. They haven't been charged or convicted of terrorism. It's really important to say that. I kind of know what you're saying when you say that, Marilyn. If a terrorist group, for example, had disrupted our lives in that way, we would be calling it terrorism. But it's not. In law, that's not what they were being charged with. Interestingly, along with some well-known media figures like Chris Packham, Dale Vince, who used to be a funder of Just Stop Oil and is now one of Labour's biggest donors. After the sentencing, he said, I think climate denial should be illegal, but instead it's illegal to talk about the climate crisis in court. Now, 5 peaceful protesters, he calls them peaceful protesters, could face years in jail as a result of this perverse ruling. It's a travesty of justice, and that's why I'm joining the calls for the new Attorney General to intervene. So we'll see whether that happens. Clive Lewis, the Labour MP, is calling for Mr Hermer, the new Attorney General, to act. So we'll see whether that goes any further. Thanks, Marilyn. Sarah's called from Sheffield. Hello, Sarah.
Hiya.
How do you see it?
I just don't really understand fundamentally why it's okay for the courts to give the protesters such a strong sentence to send a message to other people and put those protesters at more of a detriment in terms of sentencing, to send a message. But the protesters, who are trying to ultimately send a message, cannot do the same thing and put some other people ultimately in a slightly worse situation for that. So I think it's sort of hypocritical that the sentences were longer for that, and it just doesn't make any sense at all.
Well, it's interesting. In his sentencing remarks, the judge says he talks about their conduct in court and how he wasn't impressed with it, or 4 of the 5, trying to delay proceedings and things. But he said, but that isn't what you're being convicted or sentenced on. You're being convicted and sentenced on the plot solely. But later on in his remarks, he goes on to say that he is making it an exemplary sentence. So he's making an example of them. And so, making an example never feels like real justice to me, because it's you know what I mean? It's like saying if a group of children had misbehaved, but one of them had misbehaved twice, you're tough on that child but not on the others. There's something slightly wrong with that in my mind.
Yes, and I think the issue is as well is that the judge had a problem with the protesters making an example of a situation and putting obviously it's worth noting that these that innocent people were put in harm's way by the actions of the protesters to make a point to actually enable this protest to work. But the judge has also done the same thing by putting these people in more of a detriment in terms of their own personal lives. So it doesn't really make any sense to me, and I think that making an example in that way is not true justice. Do you
think the climate scientist, his name is Bill Maguire, he's Emeritus Professor of Geophysical and Climate Hazards at the University College of UCL, his expert evidence couldn't be heard in court, as our guest Gill Tavner was outlining. He derided the trial and the verdict as a farce. Whether it was a farce or not, do you think he should have been heard? Yes,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's...
we have to find a better way of doing this, don't we? Because I think the sentences seem very harsh. I don't approve of that method. I don't approve of I think the judge is right to say that they balance their own, completely understandable climate concerns and decide that it justifies pain to other people, and I don't think it does. Having said that, they are highlighting deeply serious matters that we should all be paying close attention to. But I think we all have to do better on it, don't we?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that, for us to be having these conversations is really important. And the purpose of a protest is to raise awareness for, those things that are going to affect, the majority of people and have that impact. So I think the fact that we're talking about it now is important, and I think the protest was very needed for that to happen.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Sarah in Sheffield, loads of you calling on this. I'll get to those calls in a few minutes. Thank you to all of you calling on this topic of the sentencing of 5 Just Stop Oil protesters to, between them, 5 years and 4 years variously for protests, for a plan, plot, conspiracy, whatever you want to call it. It was called a conspiracy in the trial to cause massive disruption on the M25 and for people trying to travel on and around the M25 back in 2022. Linda has called from Cockermouth in Cumbria. Hello, Linda.
Hi, Sheila.
You think this is unfair?
Sorry, Shirley, go on. I'm going to try and not rant because nobody likes a ranting.
Go on, have a rant. It's Friday.
I cannot believe you've had a lady on whose suggestion is just to make a nice record. Good Lord, what is that going to help? How is that going to help anyone? Basically, you've got 5 young people sentenced with extortionate sentences for disrupting people. Well, flights get cancelled and missed all the time, and the airlines don't get fined. It's so disproportionate. They're trying to save the world, and I know that's dramatic and emotive, but that's what they're trying to do. If your house gets flooded, which mine does, or the planet's on fire, or you can't get food, or tens of thousands of people get displaced because of global warming, well, that's inconvenient as well. And the judge sounds so out of touch. And this is why elderly judges, don't get me started on that, they're just completely out of touch with real life. The last government, was bringing in all kinds of changes to stop protest, peaceful or otherwise. And when young kids are getting sentences like that, it's just appalling.
Well, they're not all that young. I mean, they are relatively young people, but they're not kids. They're not youngsters.
No, they're not. Granted,
doesn't matter.
Anybody younger than me is young.
I know what you mean.
I just find it appalling. It's that we should be up in arms about global warming. That's what they're trying to do the right thing. They maybe don't always get it right, but the disruption that people cause is nothing to what will happen. Nothing at all, and it's coming. It's not, and just making a nice record. I'm just
hang on before you sneer again at the record. I think what she was thinking of then was something like Feed the World. You know, that record.
Yes, and they needed money.
Do They Know It's Christmas? Whatever it was called.
Money.
Yeah, and that was incredibly effective, wasn't it, at the time, of raising all that money?
It raised money, I agree.
It raised awareness too, though. It raised awareness too.
I agree with the awareness point, but the whole point of a record really is to raise money for a cause. And what I just stop all... one of the things they're protesting about is globalisation and the economy and big companies making all this money. Because, a little bit of money isn't going to help anybody in anything. I just don't get it. I don't see why that woman isn't on the phone ranting about the sentences and ranting about global warming and big corporations.
Was she accepted?
Universe, I am.
Was she accepted what they say about climate change? She's not a climate denier by any means.
Yeah, but everybody's doing the best by driving an electric car. How many people can afford an electric car? And they've scaled back plans to introduce more electric cars now because the country hasn't got the infrastructure so that I could drive from Cumbria to London in an electric car.
Do you think that these sentences, I mean, who knows, they may be reduced, I don't know, but as they stand, do you think they will act as a deterrent for this kind of protest?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I do, and that's frightening. What do we want in this country? No protest about anything.
Well, it won't frighten everybody. It's not. Nobody's saying no protests at all. The judge was saying this went too far.
So So we've talked all day about what happened in Leeds last night, and it looks to me like the police withdrew, probably not to escalate. But let's face it, in reality, it's probably because there wasn't enough police to tackle how many people were there. So in one hand, you're sentencing people to 5 years for a peaceful protest, for basically inconveniencing people.
But I think you could argue, Linda, that it's not peaceful if you're causing that level of disruption. It might not be violent. It clearly isn't violent in the sense of, hitting people around the head or anything. But I wouldn't call that a peaceful protest myself. I've got concerns about the level of sentencing for sure, but I wouldn't call that peaceful protesting.
But basically, they've got those sentences for disruption, peaceful disruption. I hear your point about you particularly don't think it can be classed as peaceful, but the disrupted people, and people are going to get massively more disrupted by global warming. I can only think that most of the people, I won't be hearing 50 year, most of the people ringing in supporting those sentences won't be hearing 50 year, but the kids will. And they're the ones who's going to have to. I just don't understand why we're not all up in arms about it. I really don't.
All right, Linda, thank you. Well, you are. Thank you very much for your call. Linda in Cockermouth. Tom in Chatham. Hello, Tom.
Hi there, how you doing? First time caller.
Okay, yeah. Fire away.
Yeah, so I've been sat listening to some of the other callers, and I've got to say, I agree with the sentencing completely. I believe oil, fuel, it runs the world. Our cargo comes on it, our food comes in it, in our lorries, in our boats. It feeds the world. It makes the world go round. I think they should have got a longer sentence, to be honest, across all of them.
Why longer? It's pretty long.
The disruption. It's the disruption that they've caused. I mean, like a caller just said before, they need to be protesting peacefully. Disrupting the traffic, stopping people from attending the funerals, stopping disabled people from getting their medication, stopping cancer patients from getting their hospital appointments. That's completely absurd.
Let me tell you, Tom, a couple of other cases adjudicated by the same judge. A person who deliberately crashed a car into the gates of Downing Street and was found to possess indecent images of children had a suspended sentence, so no jail. An on-duty police officer, not an off-duty, an on-duty police officer had sexual relations in a patrol car with a vulnerable woman, so arguably assaulted her, who he'd offered to drive home after she was ejected from a nightclub. Suspended sentence, no jail. Failures contributing to the spread of a fire in which 2 women died, £40,000 fine, no jail. And on it goes. He's very happy to keep people out of jail in cases where I would certainly be happier if he put them in jail. But in this instance, I agree with the judge's sentencing about the seriousness of what they did, but I don't think the sentences are right.
I do agree with you in some respects. I just believe, like I say, I mean, hearing what you just said now, obviously those crimes that those people have committed,
and they're very different in nature. I get that, but
but
they do tell you something about things we do punish with jails and and things we don't.
Yeah, most definitely. I just believe that the thousands and thousands of people that they disrupted, okay, they got their point across. We understand the effects that global warming is having, and obviously the emissions that's causing this global warming as such. But where else do we go? You know, our planes bring our cargo, our boats bring us cargo, our fuel as an island. We know that.
Well, yeah, it's going to be a long time before we're not using it, that's for sure. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't try to reduce the use of it. And urgently reduce it. Thanks, Tom, for your call. Tom in Chatham. Jules has said in a text, there's a critical prison overcrowding issue in the UK. Protesters speaking out on behalf of all living things, jailed for 5 years. A complete waste of public money. I hear that the demonstration cost the state an enormous amount, but this ruling sends shivers down my spine, says Jules. Chris has called from Coventry. Hello, Chris.
Hi, yeah, I think I've got more questions and concerns than direct opinions. But what bothers me is that the sentence seems to have been made worse because the people were protesting. And I know that last year, and I can't tell you the name of the act, but last year there was an act put across to deal with protesters, and it had made it illegal to make inconvenience and things like that.
Yeah, and noise factors.
Yeah, I mean, so by all means, sentence people for doing what they've done or planning to do what they've done, but don't make it worse because they've been protesting. The protesting aspect needs to be neither here nor there.
It's just so you know, it's called I had to check myself. It's called the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill. There you go.
Yeah, and that's the one. And in that ruling, there is. It does. I know it says something about.
It inhibits certain types of protest, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, it can be used at any sort of protest. So, for instance, if I wanted to protest against something and ended up blocking pavements and things like that. Could I be I could be stopped doing it, or maybe I could be sentenced for a day or two in prison because it's a lot less inconvenience than blocking the M25. I don't think that the protesting should be either here nor there. It should not be illegal whatsoever to protest. It should be illegal to block the M25 and to do those kind of things. But the fact that they've actually been protesting seems to have made it worse. And people are coming on and talking about whether
I'm not sure, based on my reading of his sentencing remarks, that that's the case. He goes through in detail what the individual offences actually amounted to, including the kind of damage to gantries and disruption and delay and all that. I'm not sure that it was about the protest. I think it was about the scale of the disruption and wanting to deter that scale of disruption whilst protesting. But
I think
I might be splitting hairs there. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, listening to what has been highlighted by what the judge has said, he has used the word protesting and etc.
Well, that's because they were. That's just describing the events. But I mean, you might be right. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
but my reading of it wasn't that. My reading of it was, let me outline what the upshot of your actions were.
What laws were they breaking? Was it anything to do with the protesting laws that were put in last year, or was it just to do with the blocking the King's Highway or whatever it is?
It would have been a blockage of the highway. It would have been climbing onto gantries and all of that kind of stuff. The disruption matters, though. If you're endangering people, and he argued, and it was argued in court and found to be the case, that people were endangered by this protest. I think they were endangered. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, and so that's a crime. You can't go around endangering people and thinking that that's not going to have consequences.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
I have a great deal of sympathy.
The way that it's been, I've got issues with the fact that I'm going to make examples of these people, and I think the fact that they've done other things in the past has made this sentencing a lot worse.
How do we get to a better place on this, do you think, in terms of how protests are carried out and how we report on them, listen to people when they're protesting?
I don't think there should be any laws whatsoever against protesting. I think that there should be laws against endangering lives and maybe blocking doing what they've done. But I don't think the protesting should be coming into it here nor there.
Criminal damage is often what they're charged with.
Yeah, you can charge.
But that's a pre-existing law.
Yeah.
The fact that you do it, but the fact that you do it while you're protesting doesn't mean you're being sent to court for protesting. You're being sent to court for criminal damage. You can protest, just don't damage someone's property in the process.
Yes.
That's the key difference, really, I think. Thanks, Chris. Chris in Coventry, it's 3:47. Jeff has loads of you messaging on this as well as calling. The convicted Stop Oil protesters should be made to do community service in areas which enhance the climate change market and areas, says Jeff. I'm not quite sure what the last bit meant, but I take your point. Keith said, a slight tangent, but the law is the law. If I kill Putin, that's still murder. I'll still go to court for it. You cannot justify breaking the law for the greater good. Mark says, you can walk into a shop and take what you like. If you beat someone up or sexually assault someone in the street, there's a good chance you get away with it. If you, the brave people who block motorways should get the last gasp of fresh air that's left on the planet, says Mark. Charlie has called from Cranley. Hello, Charlie.
Hello, Sheila. Well, my view is that the judge was completely wrong and should not have put forward such a draconian sentence. But I do suspect that Just Stop Oil is probably secretly quite delighted by the result, in the sense that this will carry on the debate. And no doubt when a petition drops on my phone to try and get them out of prison, I will gladly sign it. I think 100 years ago, when the suffragette movement, when they were in Parkhurst prison and dreadfully badly treated.
Yes, they were.
No one looks back on that now and says we're a bit over the top. The end justifies the means, and that's true in this case.
What examples of suffragette behaviour are you thinking of?
Well, the railings is the most famous thing, but they were very badly treated, if I remember, and public opinion was against them. And it's the same now. So change comes with pain. If I had the guts, I'd be joining Just Stop Oil tomorrow. If you were to turn the clock forward 100 years and interview only the rich will have survived by then, of course, and they'll look back. Will any of them say Just Stop Oil were a bit over the top? I doubt it very much.
Can I ask you, though, the difference between, whether you think there is a difference between tying yourself to some railings to get attention and to make your point when you get that attention about women's suffrage is entirely the same as inconvenience, disruption, endangerment of some vulnerable people involved, to the tune of thousands of people, to the tune of £1.1 million in policing, to the tune of about £750,000 to the economy, and some people potentially having their livelihoods threatened because of the events of that day. Do you think that that's equal to tying yourself to the railings to get attention for your cause? I don't. I think it takes things further. Your cause may be right, but you're taking things further.
But I agree with you. I don't think it is the same. The point was that it's proportionate for its time. The climate crisis is a very serious thing. We're only going to get one shot at this. And unless we get the government to take it seriously, we are going to have a real problem. And my view is that actually Keir Starmer should be inviting Just Stop Oil round to 10 Downing Street and then say, come on then, join the party, because we're taking it seriously. We now need your help to take this agenda and get it into the public consciousness.
It's in the public consciousness, I would argue, Charlie. I mean, if the calls board is anything to go by, it's in the public consciousness.
But all the people, I've been listening to your show as I always do, the whole time, and there's so many people. God bless her, the woman who said, we need to make some records. I guess maybe, but it's not important. We need people who are going to stand up and be counted, and the people put in prison today. That is exactly what they've done.
OK, thanks, Charlie. Very impassioned support for them. Charlie in Cranley. Gareth has called from Chandler's Ford. Hello, Gareth.
Hello, Sheila. I'm a great fan of yours. I've listened to your show very often and really enjoyed it. I wanted to say that first.
Thank you.
I do feel that the message has already been received with regard to climate change. I do feel that pretty well all of us have got the message that, the climate is changing. The 40-degree day in 22 was loud and clear, wasn't it? I do think that the sentencing was to deter what could have been an incremental situation with regard to those protests. I do sense that Just Stop Oil wouldn't have stopped at disrupting people and endangering life. They may have taken it still further, and therefore I think that the sentencing is a deterrent to others who may do that. That's the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing is I think a lot of industry is working hard now, including the construction industry, to decarbonise, to reduce reduce energy consumption wherever is practicable. I think if we turned off the oil taps now, we'd have a cost of living crisis that would totally dwarf what we're experiencing at the moment. I think people wouldn't be able to afford to get to work. I think people wouldn't be able to afford to heat their homes. I think it would be terrible. We need an incremental. We need to wean ourselves off it slowly, and I think that's precisely what we're doing.
But it needs to be meaningful, doesn't it, that change? It needs to be meaningful. And if it needs to speed up because of what is physically happening in the world, then even if it's not happening to us yet, we still have a responsibility to others in the world who are already experiencing. If you look at, the Indian subcontinent, for example, some of the temperatures they are experiencing are literally off the charts.
Sheila, look I've been looking at the weather in Vernon, British Columbia, which is the same latitude as us. They've had days of 40 degrees for weeks on end, around about the 40 degrees C mark.
Yeah.
That's not right.
No.
I think we all agree. I echo the sentiments of Just Stop Oil precisely, but their methods. There was a poor person just about to go for chemotherapy, for life-saving chemotherapy potentially, who couldn't get there. I find that absolutely unacceptable. I find it unacceptable that people's days were disrupted in the manner they were. I think we've all got the message. I think most of the people in those traffic jams had the message. I think, yes, okay, if I was on an island that was flooding now, I would be, absolutely panicking, and I'd want something done immediately. And yes, it has to be done immediately. But the consequences of reacting immediately would be disastrous for the whole world. We have to wean ourselves off it. We've been using oil for over a century now. It's not like we're like kids in a rumpus from bouncing against the wall and everything. We've got to stop it. We've got to find a way now of getting ourselves onto to decarbonisation as gradually and as sustainably as we possibly can.
How do you think Just Stop Oil should proceed from here? Not particularly about this case, but in the way that it tries to keep people like you and me and people calling today fully engaged with the issue politically?
I think that I've got a couple of ideas, Sheila. If they're as supported as the lady from Cockermouth seems to, she's obviously on their side.
Yeah.
If they've got that much clout and they've got that much meaning to people, good luck to them.
Be smarter.
But let's all contribute to them and let them pay the policing costs for what they do, number one. So 1.25 million quid. I mean, the Premiership clubs are going to have to pay for their policing costs. Let the disruptors pay for their policing costs. Let them do that. That's the first thing I would say. I was trying to remember what something was now.
Well, I have to leave it, I'm afraid, Gareth. But that's an interesting idea. Thank you very much indeed for your call. Time was against us. Excuse me. Running out of steam. Gareth in Chandlersford, thank you. That's it from me for the week. I'll be back on Monday. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player.